wither. We've heard a bit over the past day and a bit of where as a sector we've come from. And we've heard and had lots of discussions today about where we are, the status report. So we're going to close out by trying to take a vision of where we might be going in the future. And of course that's particularly pertinent with the Museum 2020 discussions. How do we as university museums fit into that debate, for one? We heard Chris Smith say last night that he had his 4 canons of what museums were all about, and he addressed those in terms of areas where they must make impact. Stewardship, scholarship, education, and that rather nice concept of public excitement. And I said this morning about how, with stewardship underpinning, we needed to be able to demonstrate impact in research, in higher education, in schools education, and in public engagement. And we might view that diamond that I showed actually as being a virtual hill. And as museums, we're trying to get towards the centre so that we've got balanced activity and we can make impact and therefore guarantee funding streams in all of those areas. But inevitably, in a classic metastable situation, our little marble will keep rolling down towards one of the apices. And I think a challenge for the sector is to try and individual museums is to try and get our marble back into the middle so that we're operating in the middle of the field and we can maximise our opportunities in that way. So we've got 2 provocateurs who I'm going to hand over to now. And first up is going to be Nick Poole, who's the director of the Collections Trust, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to say what an immense pleasure it was to be part of a session earlier today during which somebody called Nick introduced the session, somebody called Nick asked a member of the panel called Nick a question. Everybody in this room appears to be called Nick. I feel entirely at home. So, what impact will university museums have in 2020? By the way, if you have any trouble remembering which Nick I am, I'm the one who forgot his suit wasn't coming out of the dry cleaners until Monday. Considerably less formal than I normally would be. I thought I'd start with a bit of a warning here. They told me I had to be provocative. I'm not by nature a provocateur, so in a terribly English way I'd like to say I'm awfully sorry. Like queuing this up. I actually put these slides online last night and sent out a tweet this morning saying, if you're interested, here are the slides. Since when they've been viewed 1,100 times, and I've had 2 dire warnings and an expression of concern. This should be fun. I studied as an artist. I trained as a painter, in fact, and one of the things they make you do, first of all, is they send you out with a pencil and a piece of paper and a sketch in museums and galleries around the country. And so I spent a very happy year sketching, learning from greatness, and discovering the wonders of human endeavour. And so I owe you a tremendous debt of thanks as university museums. You can tell I'm really buttering you up here. So thank you very much for that. So the aim really was to try and provoke some discussion about the role of university museums, particularly in the context of their relationship with the universities within which you're situated. So the kind of line I thought I'd start off with is this one really, is the idea of university museums as trophies in a global education market. Now there's 2 ways of reading the word trophy. There's trophy as in trophy husband, or there's trophy as in Champions League. And I'm here to argue that we should be feeling positive about the latter and not so much about the former. For me, I think, and I am by no means an expert, but for me, from the outside, it looks as though the fortunes of our university museums, the great university institutions in the UK, are in some ways indivisible from the fortunes of universities. So when I was preparing for this talk, I did a little bit of investigation, Googling, I believe they call it, about futurology of universities. Where's all of this going? And I found a tremendous body of people asking questions like this. What is the role of university museums in this brave new world? Now there seem to be 2 visions. One is very much the apocalyptic vision that we're on a train that's careering downwards down a hill, that the bridge is out ahead of us. And so we find quotes like this one from a university vice-chancellor in Australia The traditional university model is the analogue of the print newspaper. 15 years max, you've got the transformation. It reminds me, I was at a dinner party 2 Christmases ago, where somebody turned around and said to me, knowing full well what I do for a living, I like collections so much I named an organisation after them. He said, the problem with you lot is you're like vinyl manufacturers. Your business model has evaporated, you just don't know it yet. To which I say, sod you, because it's not true. And I think all of the reasons that we've heard from Henry and from others about why we should be optimistic are incredibly important. So there's the apocalyptic view of Wither universities. There's also the cyber-apocalyptic view of Wither universities. This, in case anybody doesn't know who this is Sergey Brin from Google, wearing the ever-so-stylish Google Glass. So that doohickey on his eye is making the information content of the universe visible and usable. So the idea is as you move through spaces, information will cohere around you in this extraordinary way. There's a brilliant parody of this on YouTube where all you get is Google ads pinging up. Probably entirely too likely. And we get people saying things like this: the transmission of knowledge need no longer be tethered to a college campus. The technical affordances of cloud-based computing, digital textbooks, mobile connectivity, high-quality streaming video and just-in-time information gathering have pushed vast amounts of knowledge to the placeless web. So thinking about the point Edley was making about place-making. It's amazing how these incredibly confident predictions about the digital future very often come from web development companies. So this one from a company, Pew Internet Research. But we can't argue with the ubiquity of digital. We can't argue with the way that the web has disrupted the asymmetry of the provision of information, nor can we argue with the disruptive effect that that's going to have on university provision and the university experience from the student's point of view. But I do think we can be optimistic. You see, I'm far too nice to be provocative. And so I'm going to spend the rest of this talking about why I would reinforce that message about optimism. There's a fascinating report, if you haven't seen it, from Ernst & Young, commissioned by the Australian government, called The University of the Future, which looked at 5 big drivers, things that are changing in the academic, higher and further education context. And they looked at this, the democratization of knowledge, that it is no longer the case that knowledge is the preserve of an elite, but knowledge has been democratized in an incredibly important and disruptive way. And we've seen that already over the last 10 years of development in museum practice, you know, that it is no longer the role of the museum to contain knowledge, but to facilitate the flow and the growth of knowledge. I was at the Smithsonian recently, and their mission statement in their strategic plan is the increase and diffusion of knowledge, which I think is an incredibly ambitious and visionary plan. It's also the mission statement of the internet, but we won't worry about that. They then looked at this issue about market competition, that all of these academic institutions are competing for resource, for attention, for mindshare, for quality, and looking at the basis of that competition. They then talked about the ubiquity of digital technology, of access, of mobile, of cloud, of the technologies that are changing daily life and consumer expectations. They talked about global mobility as a key change in the university environment, that now you have people who can, who will move around the world. And they talked about this absolutely critical line of development around the integration of the output, the work of universities and HE with industry. They particularly singled out a consortium called InnoEnergy. I don't know if any of you are involved in it, with a couple of nods around the room, but that is an industry-led consortium that includes academic institutions, 1 or 2 cultural institutions, big global players in energy production, creating an open university in which they're sharing knowledge and new discovery around energy science. So I just thought it would be useful to look at what all of that means for the organisations that you work in. This is the best, I'm afraid, evolutionary diagram I could find. There's the other one where the guy ends up at a keyboard. We've all seen that one before. Universities have to adapt to survive. We've seen that before. It's not necessarily a threat, but it is an impetus. It's a momentum that we have to acknowledge. And so given that intrinsic link between your organisation and the organisations with whom you have this connection, your ability to facilitate, to support, to extend the value and impact of that adaptation is going to be absolutely critical to your role as part of the overall academic offer. So I thought it would be worth looking, just finally, at what seem to emerge as three possible response strategies. So a lot of the literature about where universities are going in response to this impetus seems to focus on these three areas. The first of which you might broadly characterise as the kind of head in the sand model, the streamlined status quo. It's not really happening, that one. The second is to differentiate based on quality and focus and niche. So rather than having academic institutions that try and serve the known universe of the sciences, the humanities, the digital humanities, you focus on specific areas in which you are academically excellent, and you appeal to a global elite, you appeal to students who can afford to travel and learn. And then there's the radical innovation model. There's the world of MOOCs and placelessness and decentralized and digital. And some people, particularly internet companies, would have you believe that that is going to sweep in and replace the universe that we're operating in. I doubt it very much. But some of the implications then around those models, if we are in this status quo, if we're in this kind of situation normal, I won't finish the quote, then we are still going to have to deal with a number of issues. We're going to have to look at a diminished research base anyway, so we're going to have to look at what it means for the institutions with research collections, recognising, as so many others have before me, that no two of your organisations are the same when it comes to the basis of your collections. We are likely to be looking at a more focused teaching agenda. We've already heard about students seeking out teaching and learning opportunities that are more career focused, that are more specific around where they're going to go in their lives. We have already heard about efficiency savings, and I've heard some tremendously positive things, but there is always that disclaimer at the end of the telephone call that says the value of your back office may go down as well as up. So the kinds of support, access to legal advice, access to IT support, access to window cleaning and lawn mowing, that stuff is beginning to evaporate. There is then obviously this role that you play already. I'm just looking at institutions like this, but so many university museums around the country, around enhancing the brand of the university and enhancing the competitiveness of that brand, the student and campus experience. There is then, though, this idea of the elite university, and lest we believe this is a flight of fancy, these exist. You know, I mean, there are nations around the world in which there are trophy museums that are obviously created solely for the purpose of brand enhancement. So you have a museum which is about really enhancing the competitiveness of the academic institution. You have a prestige venue for really interesting events and fundraising. You have a very limited interest not only in collecting activity and conservation in what I would characterize as traditional collections management competencies, but also a limit in the function or the perception of the function of the museum as being a driver of research and innovation. And then you have this idea that if the elite university is going to differentiate itself around specific disciplines, particularly specific disciplines that are economically competitive in terms of the students, then the collections policies, the purpose, the identity of the museum becoming increasingly focused around that brand extension proposition rather than the core mission and the collecting purpose, the ambitions of the organisation. Now, I'm not saying this is a likely future, I'm just saying it's a possible future. I thought it would be worth just mentioning that quote, which came from a Vice-Chancellor in the UK, looking ahead to the future of universities and the extent to which not the cultural offer, but the kind of teaching offer could extend that. They said there will be 15 to 20 independent global brands. The rest will be playing for the silver medal. And I don't know if you recognise truth in that or not. Finally then, the radically innovative university in which culture, knowledge, objects, collections, interpretation are function-based, not place-based. They are distributed, they're decentralised, they're not physical, they're not tangible. And so you look at the world of things like the Khan Academy, you look at Udacity, you look at what it means for the Smart History project at the Khan Academy to have 20 million registered learners using heritage content as part of the embedded learning within their courses, within their MOOC. And so you look at differentiating the museum the museum responsibility, not on the basis of the place, but on the basis of curatorial expertise and the rigour of curatorship. You then look at the way in which things like smart history are being used to extend the value of online, so there's a strengthening of that slightly intangible nature of the online offer. You look at public-private partnerships, things like the partnerships that are going on around Google, Bright Solid, and others. You see this very strong move away from object-based learning, from object-based culture, coming in a place in which you are overcoming the problem of place by making things massively decentralized. So from my point of view, I think the thing that concerns me is not to present these as probable futures for your museums, but to present them as possible futures for your museums. And the thing that troubles me in looking at this question is really that I see, and I may have this wrong, but my role here is to prove it, is that the relationship with the university is a symbiotic one, and it's a very intrinsically connected symbiosis. And that may mean that you don't have the luxury of choosing which your museum wants to be. It may be that the momentum, the impetus behind the way in which your academic partner, your university context develops, defines the options that stand in front of you in terms of your development. So that's my answer to what impact will university museums have in 2020. The more I looked at this question, the more I realised 2020 is really not so very far away. So the good thing is we'll all have the opportunity of discovering that I was in fact wrong. But for the time being, thank you very much for your attention.